Julian Vance considered the rain. It was not a dramatic storm, merely a persistent gray drizzle that bled all the color from the city, leaving behind a world of concrete and steel washed in monochrome. It was a perfect reflection of his own inner landscape, a place that had been leached of vibrancy for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. The coffee shop was an anonymous haven. No one here knew him as the architect of a corporate empire, the man whose face occasionally appeared on the glossy covers of business magazines. Here, he was just a man in a well-tailored but unremarkable gray suit, staring into a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. The warmth had seeped out of it, just as it had from his life. He sat at a small table by the large plate glass window, a silent observer of the small, quiet dramas of a Tuesday afternoon. A student hunched over a laptop, her brow furrowed in concentration. 2 friends laughed softly, their heads close together over steaming mugs. It was a tapestry of connection he could see but no longer feel. He was behind glass, both literally and metaphorically. His grief was a silent companion, a heavy coat he could never take off. It had settled into his bones after Amelia was gone, reshaping him into this quieter, colder version of himself. He went through the motions of life, board meetings, strategic planning, billion-dollar acquisitions, with a chilling efficiency. He was successful, powerful, and utterly, profoundly alone. A small sound broke through his reverie, not the clatter of ceramic or the hiss of the espresso machine, but something smaller, closer, a soft scuff of a tiny shoe on the polished floor. He lowered his gaze from the rain-streaked window and saw her. A little girl, no older than 5, with a riot of dark curls escaping from 2 slightly lopsided pigtails. She wore a bright yellow raincoat, a defiant splash of sunshine in the otherwise muted room. In her hands, she clutched a drawing, a chaotic swirl of purple and orange crayon on a slightly crumpled piece of paper. She stopped a few feet from his table, her head tilted, her eyes, large and brown and startlingly direct, fixed on his face. Julian was accustomed to being looked at, but not like this. People looked at him with deference, with avarice, with professional curiosity. No one had looked at him with simple, unvarnished interest in a very long time. He did not smile. The muscles for it felt foreign, unused. He simply met her gaze, waiting for her to move on, to be collected by a parent. But she didn't move on. She took another small step forward, her tiny rain boots squeaking softly. She held up the drawing as if it were a shield or an offering. Then she spoke, her voice clear and high. "Why are you so sad?" The question landed in the quiet space of his solitude with the force of a physical blow. It was so simple, so direct, so utterly devoid of the cautious platitudes adults used. His business partners asked, "How are you?" as a prelude to a request. His staff asked it with a nervous flicker in their eyes. No one had actually asked him about the sadness, the thing that was so plainly written on his face, for years. They had all learned to look away from it. He had no answer. The truth was too vast, too heavy for the light air of a coffee shop. Before he could formulate a response, a woman hurried over, a flush of embarrassment on her cheeks. "Lily, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice a soft, melodic thing that was at odds with her harried expression. "You can't go bothering people." She gently took the little girl's hand. She was tall and slender, with the same dark curly hair as her daughter, though hers was pulled back in a loose, messy bun. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, and there were faint shadows of exhaustion under her eyes, but she moved with a weary grace. She looked at Julian, her expression apologetic. "I'm truly sorry," she repeated. "She's very direct." Julian found his voice, a low rumble that felt rusty from disuse in any personal capacity. "It's all right." She asked a fair question. The woman, Alara, offered a small, tired smile. It was a genuine thing, and it briefly lit up her face. She didn't seem to recognize him at all. To her, he was not Julian Vance, titan of industry. He was just the sad man in the corner her daughter had decided to interrogate. The anonymity was a strange, unexpected comfort. She guided her daughter, Lily, back to their small table, where a half-eaten pastry and a glass of milk waited. Lily twisted in her seat to look at him one more time, her expression still full of innocent curiosity. Julian turned his attention back to his cold coffee, but the quiet of his grief had been disturbed. A single, clear question had sent a ripple across the still gray surface of his existence. A few minutes later, Alara approached his table again, this time alone. She held a small paper plate in her hands. On it sat a cookie. It was not a perfect machine-cut circle from the cafe's display case. It was lumpy, irregularly shaped, with chocolate chips distributed in a charmingly haphazard way. It was clearly homemade. "Lily insisted," she said, her voice soft. "She said you needed a happy cookie. I'm sorry again for the intrusion." She placed the plate on his table, beside his untouched coffee. "You don't have to," he started to say, the automatic refusal of a man unaccustomed to accepting anything without a price. "Please," she said simply. "It's just a cookie." She gave him another one of those small, fleeting smiles and retreated to her table before he could protest further. He looked down at the offering. An imperfect, homemade cookie. A gesture of simple, unprompted kindness from a stranger, prompted by the unblinking honesty of a child. It was an entirely non-transactional act, a concept so foreign in his world that it felt like a dispatch from another planet. He picked it up. It was still slightly warm. He broke a piece off and put it in his mouth. The chocolate was rich, the dough soft. It tasted of home, of a warmth he had long forgotten. And then, something remarkable happened. A slow, unfamiliar sensation pulled at the corners of his mouth. It was small, hesitant, like a muscle being used for the first time after a long atrophy. It was a smile, a real one. It felt fragile and momentous all at once. He looked over at their table. Alara was helping Lily put her coat back on, their movements a familiar practiced dance of mother and child. Lily caught his eye and gave him a tiny conspiratorial wave. Julian raised his hand in a slow, almost tentative gesture and waved back. The small, warm feeling in his chest was a flicker of light in a vast darkness. He didn't know what it was, but he knew he didn't want it to go out. As he watched them leave, the yellow raincoat a final, bright punctuation mark disappearing into the gray street, he felt a subtle shift inside him. The rain was still falling, the city was still muted, but for the first time in a very long time, he noticed a single, stubborn rose blooming in the planter outside the window, its petals heavy with water, but defiantly, brilliantly red. It became a routine, not a planned one, but a gravitational pull he no longer bothered to resist. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Julian found himself in the same chair, at the same table, in the same quiet coffee shop. He told himself it was a good place to work, away from the sterile silence of his office and the echoing emptiness of his house. It was a lie, but a harmless one. He was there for the splash of yellow, for the sound of a little girl's laughter, for the sight of a mother's tired, gentle smile. He never approached them. He maintained his distance, an observer on the periphery of their warm, small world. He would watch as Alara patiently helped Lily with a coloring book, her finger tracing the outlines of a cartoon animal. He saw the way she listened, truly listened, to Lily's rambling stories, her expression one of complete absorption. Lily, for her part, had accepted his presence as a feature of the landscape. She would give him a solemn wave upon arriving and a cheerful, "Bye, Mr. Julian," upon leaving. He learned her name was Lily, and her mother's was Alara from overhearing their quiet conversations. One afternoon, Lily marched over to his table, her face set with determination. She held out a new drawing. It was a stick figure of a man in a gray suit, standing under a scribbled gray cloud from which blue lines fell. Despite the gloom of the subject matter, the stick figure had a wide, red, smiling mouth. At the bottom, in shaky, reverse-lettered print, was his name, Julian. "This is for you," she announced, placing it on his table with great ceremony. "Thank you, Lily," he said, his voice softer than it was at any other time of the week. "It's very good." He carefully folded the drawing and placed it in the inside pocket of his suit jacket, next to his multi-million-dollar fountain pen. It felt infinitely more valuable. He had a collection of them now, tucked away in a drawer in his study. A purple cat, an orange sun, a portrait of him, smiling. A week later, a minor crisis erupted. Lily, in her excitement to show Alara a finished drawing, slipped on a small puddle of spilled water near the counter. She went down with a surprised cry, her fall broken by her hands. It was not a serious fall, but it was a shock, and the sharp cry was immediately followed by the trembling intake of breath that precedes a torrent of tears. Several people looked up, startled. Alara was on her feet in an instant, her face a mask of concern, rushing to her daughter's side. Julian moved without thinking. He was by their side a moment after Alara, his usual reserve dissolving in the face of the child's distress. "Are you all right, little one?" Alara asked, her voice trembling slightly as she gathered Lily into her arms. Lily's face was buried in her mother's shoulder, her small body shaking with sobs. She held up one hand, revealing a scraped, reddened palm. While Alara murmured comforting words, Julian was already opening his briefcase. He was a man who believed in preparation for any contingency. Tucked into a side pocket, alongside contracts and market analyses, was a small, comprehensive first aid kit. He opened it, his movements calm and efficient. He pulled out an antiseptic wipe and a small, brightly colored bandage decorated with cartoon animals. He knelt down, not crowding them, but making his presence a calm, steadying one. "May I?" he asked Alara quietly. She looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise, and then nodded, a flicker of gratitude in her expression. "Okay, Lily," Julian said softly, his voice even and gentle. "This might sting for just a second, but then it will feel all better. Can you be brave for me?" Lily, her sobs subsiding into sniffles, peeked at him from the safety of her mother's arms. She looked at the colorful bandage he held, then at his calm face, and gave a tiny, wobbly nod. He carefully cleaned the small scrape, his touch surprisingly deft and gentle. Lily flinched but didn't cry out. Then he peeled the backing from the bandage. "Which animal would you like?" he asked, as if this were the most important decision in the world. "We have a lion or a monkey." "Monkey," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. He carefully applied the monkey bandage to her palm. "There," he said. "The monkey will protect it." Lily looked at her hand, now adorned with a cheerful cartoon, and her tears finally stopped. She gave him a watery, tremulous smile. Alara was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. It was more than just gratitude. It was a kind of quiet wonder. He had reacted not with panic or awkwardness, but with a gentle competence that was profoundly reassuring. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to do that." Of course I did," he replied simply, standing up and putting the kit away. He felt a strange unease at being the center of attention, yet a deeper satisfaction at having been able to offer a small, tangible comfort. The next time he saw them, there was a small envelope on his table when he arrived. His name was written on the front in elegant looping script. Inside was a simple card. It read, "Thank you for being our knight in shining armor and for having monkey bandages. In recognition of your services, you have been granted honorary lifetime membership in the Kind Friend Club. Population 3. Below the words was a small drawing from Lily, this time of a stick figure in a gray suit with a superhero's cape, holding hands with a smaller stick figure who had a bandaged hand. Julian held the card in his hands for a long time, a club, a membership, an inclusion into their tiny circle. He felt that flicker of warmth in his chest again, this time stronger, more sustained. A small, sturdy flame against the encroaching cold. He placed the card carefully into his wallet, a charter for a club he hadn't known he desperately wanted to join. The quiet rhythm of their shared afternoons began to deepen. The distance between his table and theirs shrank, not physically, but emotionally. Conversations started to bloom in the spaces between coffee sips and crayon strokes. They were small at first, tentative explorations. He learned that Alara was a freelance graphic designer, piecing together a living with projects she took on late at night after Lily was asleep. He learned that Lily loved dinosaurs and the color purple and believed that squirrels were just rats with fluffy tails. She learned that he worked in an office. He was vague about the details, not out of a desire to be deceptive, but because his corporate life felt like a different world, a different language. It was a gray suit he wore, and here, in this small, warm space, he wanted to be just Julian. One rainy Thursday, the cafe was more crowded than usual. They ended up sharing a larger table, the unspoken barrier between them finally dissolved. Lily was deeply engrossed in a new coloring book, her tongue sticking out in concentration. "She looks so much like you," Julian observed quietly, watching the way a stray curl fell across Lily's forehead, identical to one that had escaped Alara's bun. Alara smiled, a soft, genuine expression that reached her eyes. "I know. Sometimes it's like looking at a little ghost of myself." A shadow passed over her face, brief but noticeable. Her father, he's not in the picture, hasn't been for a long time, it's just been the two of us. It was a simple statement, offered without drama or a plea for sympathy. It was a fact of her life, like her eye color or her name. Julian recognized the quiet strength it took to state it so plainly. He felt a sudden fierce protectiveness toward this woman and her child, a feeling that was entirely new to him. He felt compelled to offer something of himself in return, a piece of his own fractured story. "My wife passed away," he said, the words feeling thick and heavy in his mouth. 3 years ago. Alara's gaze softened with an empathy that was so pure it almost hurt. She didn't offer the empty platitudes he was so used to hearing. She didn't say, "I'm sorry for your loss," or "She's in a better place." She just looked at him and said, "That must be a very heavy silence to live with." He could only nod, his throat tight. She understood. She didn't try to fix the silence or fill it with noise. She simply acknowledged its weight. In that moment, he felt more seen than he had in years. The bond between them solidified, forged not in shared joy, but in a shared understanding of loss and resilience. A few weeks later, he witnessed a moment that made his blood run cold with a quiet rage. Alara was at the counter, buying a small bottle of juice for Lily. He saw her swipe her card, and then watched as the young cashier shook his head. She swiped it again. The same result. A flush crept up her neck. He could see the subtle tightening of her shoulders, the quick, embarrassed glance she shot over her shoulder to see if anyone was watching. The man in line behind her sighed with audible impatience. "It's declined," the cashier said, his voice louder than necessary. "I don't understand," Alara murmured, fumbling in her wallet. "There should be... I just got paid." Her voice was a tight, strained whisper. The public humiliation was a palpable thing, a hot, uncomfortable energy in the air. Julian started to rise, his instinct to stride over, pay for the juice, to erase the problem with a casual wave of his hand. But he stopped. He saw the proud, desperate set of her jaw. To intervene now in front of everyone would only deepen her embarrassment. It would cast him as the wealthy rescuer and her as the damsel in distress, a dynamic he knew she would hate. It would break the fragile equilibrium they had built. So he sat, his hands clenched into fists under the table, and forced himself to do nothing. It was one of the hardest things he had ever done. Alara, her face pale, apologized to the cashier and the man behind her, and quickly walked back to her table. "Come on, sweetie," she said to Lily, her voice unnaturally bright. "You know what? Let's have water instead. It's much healthier." She avoided his eyes as she gathered their things. They left quickly, without their usual cheerful goodbye. Julian waited 5 minutes, his anger a cold, hard knot in his stomach. Then he paid for his coffee and left. He didn't go back to his office. He drove to the small park near her apartment, a place he knew she sometimes took Lily to after the cafe. He found her on a bench, facing a small duck pond. Lily was happily throwing breadcrumbs to the ducks a few yards away, oblivious to her mother's turmoil. Alara was not crying. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands clenched in her lap, staring at the water with an expression of such profound weariness that it made his chest ache. She was trying to rebuild her armor, to shore up the walls that had been breached. He walked over and sat down on the other end of the bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. He didn't say a word. He just sat, sharing the silence with her. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice thick. "It was only $3, and I didn't have it." She laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. "Some days it feels like I'm running a marathon on a treadmill. I'm giving it everything I have, and I'm not moving an inch." He still said nothing, simply listening, giving her the space to let the words out. "I just get so tired," she whispered, her composure finally cracking. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "I get so tired of having to be strong all the time, for her, for myself. There's no one to lean on." Julian turned to look at her then, his gaze direct and full of a quiet intensity. He spoke the words that had been forming in his heart for weeks. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Alara." His voice was low and certain. "Not anymore. You can lean on me." She looked at him, her eyes wide and vulnerable. He wasn't offering money. He wasn't offering solutions. He was offering something far more valuable. He was offering his strength as a shield, a place for her to rest. He was giving her permission to be vulnerable. She didn't answer, but another tear fell, and this one was not of shame or frustration. It was a tear of release. She gave him a small, watery, grateful smile. In the quiet of the park, with the ducks quacking softly on the pond, their friendship deepened into something more profound, more vital. A trust was being built, brick by quiet, steady brick. His gestures of kindness became more personal, more attuned to the fine details of her life he now observed so closely. He noticed that on stressful days, when a client was being difficult or a deadline loomed, she would forgo her usual coffee for chamomile tea. One afternoon, after he overheard her on a tense phone call, she walked up to the counter to find a steaming cup of chamomile tea already waiting for her, paid for. The barista just nodded in his direction. Alara met his eyes across the room, and the silent "thank you" she mouthed was more intimate than any spoken word. One rainy morning, he saw her hurrying Lily toward the cafe, an inadequate newspaper held over their heads. By the time he left an hour later, the rain had intensified. He walked to a nearby store and bought a large, sturdy, high-quality umbrella, a deep navy blue. He returned to the cafe and left it leaning against the leg of her empty table before departing. He knew she would know who it was from. It was a simple act, but it said, "I am thinking of you. I am watching out for you." The true shift came on a gray, chilly Tuesday. Lily, who had been unusually quiet and listless, suddenly felt warm to Alara's touch. A quick check of her forehead confirmed it. She was burning up. Panic flared in Alara's eyes, sharp and cold. A sick child was every single parent's nightmare, a logistical and emotional crisis all in one. "I think she has a fever," she said to Julian, her voice tight with anxiety. "I need to get her home, maybe to the doctor." Julian was on his feet instantly. "My car's right outside," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "No waiting for a taxi in the rain. Let's go." He helped Alara get a sleepy, whimpering Lily into her coat. He held the new navy umbrella over them as he walked them to his car, a sleek black sedan that was so unobtrusive it was almost invisible, yet screamed of quiet expense. He didn't even think about the pristine leather seats as he helped Alara buckle a feverish child into the back. He drove them not to her home, but to a private urgent care clinic he knew of, one with no long waits and the best pediatricians. Alara started to protest, knowing she couldn't afford it, but he cut her off gently. "Don't worry about it. Just worry about her." He waited with them in the comfortable, quiet waiting room. He bought Lily a juice box and held it for her while she took small, weak sips. When they were called in, he stayed in the waiting room, a silent, steady presence she knew was just outside the door. The diagnosis was just a nasty flu virus, but the doctor's reassurance was priceless. They left with a prescription for fever reducer and instructions for rest and fluids. By the time they got back in the car, Lily was fast asleep in Alara's arms, her breathing still hot but more even. Julian drove them to her apartment building, a modest walk-up in a quiet neighborhood. He parked the car and turned to her. "I'll carry her up," he said softly. Alara nodded, too exhausted and grateful to argue. He gently lifted the sleeping child from her arms. Lily was a warm, trusting weight against his chest. He had forgotten how much a sleeping child could weigh, how profoundly real and precious it felt. He followed Alara up the 3 flights of stairs to her small, tidy apartment. It was filled with Lily's drawings, secondhand furniture made charming with colorful throws, and the unmistakable feeling of a home built on love rather than money. He laid Lily down on her bed, pulling a quilt decorated with stars and planets over her. As he did, Lily stirred, her eyes fluttering open for just a moment. She looked up at him, her gaze hazy with fever and sleep. "Mr. Julian," she murmured, her voice a sleepy whisper, "you take care of Mommy." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact, a child's simple, profound observation. Then her eyes drifted closed again, and she was asleep. Julian stood there for a moment, the child's words echoing in the quiet room. He walked back into the small living room where Alara was standing by the window, watching the rain. She turned to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She had heard it too. Witnessing his unwavering calm, his gentle competence, his selfless care for her and her daughter, a final wall around her heart crumbled into dust. This quiet, sad, intensely kind man had shown her, through actions rather than words, what true strength and partnership looked like. It wasn't loud or boastful. It was a steady, reliable presence. It was a cup of tea. It was an umbrella. It was a safe ride in the middle of a crisis. She realized, with a clarity that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that she was falling in love with him. It was a love that felt different from anything she had known before. It was not a dizzying, frantic passion, but a deep, quiet certainty. It felt like coming home. "She's right, you know," Alara said, her voice soft but clear. "You do." He took a step closer to her, his heart pounding in his chest. "I want to," he said, his voice raw with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "If you'll let me." The space between them crackled with unspoken feelings. The rain beat against the window pane, but inside the small apartment, a new warmth was blooming, chasing away the last of the shadows. Their fragile new world was shattered by a single piece of mail. It was a long, cream-colored envelope, delivered by courier, bearing the letterhead of a downtown law firm. Alara saw it in her mailbox and felt a knot of ice form in her stomach. Official letters never brought good news. She waited until she was back in her apartment, Lily safely occupied with a puzzle, to open it. Her hands trembled as she slit the seal. The language was cold, formal, and brutal. It was from a lawyer representing Mark, Lily's father, a man she hadn't seen or heard from in almost 4 years. The letter stated that Mark, having recently come into a more stable financial situation, was now seeking to establish his paternal rights and was petitioning for partial custody of Lily. The words swam before her eyes. Custody. A man who had walked out when his daughter was barely a year old, who had never sent a birthday card or paid a cent of support, now wanted to disrupt their lives. She knew what it really was. Mark was a creature of opportunity. He must have heard through the grapevine that she was not destitute, but stable. Or perhaps he thought he could use Lily as leverage to get money from her. The reason didn't matter. The threat was existential. The idea of letting that man, with his casual cruelty and selfish nature, have any claim on her daughter was unthinkable. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. She sank onto her sofa, the letter crinkling in her clenched fist. All the strength she had so carefully cultivated felt like it was draining out of her. She was alone against this. A legal battle would be ruinously expensive. She had no resources, no power. The next day at the coffee shop, she tried to pretend everything was normal, but the mask was thin. Julian saw it instantly. He saw the new tension in her shoulders, the dark circles under her eyes that had nothing to do with fatigue and everything to do with fear. He saw the way her smile didn't reach her eyes. He didn't press her. He simply watched, his concern a quiet, steady hum. He saw her take a phone call, her back turned to the room, and watched her posture crumple. When she returned to the table, her face was pale. He waited until Lily was absorbed in a drawing. "Alara," he said gently, his voice pulling her from her panicked thoughts. "Something is wrong. You don't have to tell me what it is, but you have to know you are not alone in it." Her composure broke. Tears welled in her eyes. "He's back," she whispered, the words tasting like poison. "Lily's father. He wants custody." Julian's expression hardened, a flicker of something cold and dangerous in his eyes. It was the face of the CEO, the ruthless negotiator, but this time it was in service of a fierce protective instinct. "He has no grounds," he said, his voice a low, angry growl. "It doesn't matter," she said, her voice choked with despair. "He has a lawyer. He has money. I have nothing, Julian. I can't fight him." "Yes, you can," he said with absolute certainty. "And you will." He didn't say more. He didn't make grand promises, but in that moment, Alara felt a tiny seed of hope. Later that day, Julian sat in his stark, minimalist office high above the city. He made one phone call. He spoke for less than 5 minutes. He named the best, most feared family law attorney in the city, a woman known for her surgical precision and take-no-prisoners approach in the courtroom. "She needs the best," Julian said into the phone. "Spare no expense, handle everything, and she is not to know the bill is being directed to me. As far as she's concerned, it is pro bono, a referral from a community aid society. Is that understood?" 2 days later, Alara received a call. It was from the office of Catherine Croft, a lawyer whose name she recognized from high-profile cases in the news. Alara was confused, explaining that there must be some mistake, that she could never afford such a firm. A calm, professional voice on the other end explained that her case had been referred to them and that Ms. Croft had agreed to take it on, pro bono. Alara was stunned, overwhelmed with a relief so profound it made her dizzy. It felt like a miracle. She met with Catherine Croft the next day. The lawyer was formidable, brilliant, and radiated an aura of unshakable competence. After hearing Alara's story, she laid out a strategy that was both aggressive and airtight. For the first time in days, Alara felt like she could breathe. But a small, nagging question remained. A referral from a community aid society? It seemed too convenient, too perfect. The pieces began to click into place in her mind, Julian's hard-eyed certainty, his quiet promise that she would fight. That afternoon, she confronted him at the cafe. She waited until Lily was out of earshot, getting a glass of water. "It was you, wasn't it?" she asked, her voice low but intense. "Catherine Croft." Julian didn't deny it. He simply met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Why, Julian?" she asked, a storm of emotions swirling inside her. Gratitude, anger at his high-handedness, confusion. "Why would you do that? I don't want your charity. I don't want to be a project you fix with your money." He leaned forward, his eyes holding hers. His voice was quiet but vibrated with a powerful sincerity. "This isn't charity, Alara, and you are not a project. This is your reinforcement. You are the strongest person I have ever met. You have built this incredible life for Lily, this fortress of love and safety, all on your own. You are her protector. You stand on that wall every single day and fight for her." He paused, taking a breath. But even the strongest protector needs someone to guard their back. He is a threat to her, which means he is a threat to you. You protect her. Let me protect you. The words struck her with the force of a revelation. He wasn't trying to rescue her. He wasn't diminishing her strength or trying to solve her problems for her. He was offering his resources as a weapon for her to wield. He was standing beside her in the fight, not in front of her. He was treating her as an equal, a partner. The anger and confusion melted away, replaced by a wave of emotion so powerful it stole her breath. This was what it felt like to be truly seen, to be truly supported. She reached across the table and for the first time took his hand. His fingers curled around hers, a firm, warm, reassuring pressure. It was not the tentative touch of new acquaintances, but the solid, grounding clasp of two people who had found their anchor in each other. "Okay," she whispered, her voice thick. "Okay, Julian." The legal threat from Mark evaporated with astonishing speed. Faced with the formidable Catherine Croft, who produced a mountain of evidence detailing his years of abandonment and financial negligence, Mark's lawyer quickly advised him to withdraw his petition. He vanished from their lives as quickly as he had appeared, a ghost vanquished by a light he couldn't withstand. The relief was a physical thing, a weight lifting from Alara's shoulders she hadn't realized was so heavy. She felt lighter, freer. The future, which had been a dark, threatening storm cloud, was once again full of possibility. Their relationship, now solidified by the crucible of crisis, deepened into a quiet, comfortable intimacy. Holding hands across the cafe table became their new normal. Julian started meeting them at the park, pushing Lily on the swings, his deep laughter a sound she had never thought she would hear. He became a fixture in their lives, a steady, dependable presence that felt as essential as the air they breathed. But the crisis had exposed the precarity of her situation in other ways. Her landlord, a nervous man spooked by the official-looking mail and a single, unpleasant visit from Mark trying to find her, began to make noises about not renewing her lease. The foundation of her small, safe world felt shaky. One evening, after Julian had stayed for dinner, a simple meal of pasta and salad that felt like a banquet in his presence, Alara confessed her worries about the apartment. She watched him absorb the information, his expression thoughtful. He left soon after, and she felt a familiar pang of anxiety. But an hour later, her doorbell rang. It was Julian, standing in her doorway, the evening light catching the earnest, serious expression on his face. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low and steady, "about your lease, about Mark, about everything. And I've realized that what I've been offering, a cup of tea, an umbrella, a lawyer, it's all been patchwork. It's not a solution. It's not a foundation." He took a step into her small entryway, closing the distance between them. "Alara, your home shouldn't be a place of anxiety. It should be a sanctuary, a place where you and Lily feel completely and utterly safe, a place you don't have to fight to keep." He looked directly into her eyes, and what she saw there was not pity, but a deep, abiding love and a heartfelt plea. "I don't want to be your knight anymore," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to be your partner. I want to build a life with you and Lily, a real one, on solid ground." He took both of her hands in his. "My house is too big. It's too quiet. It's not a home. It's just a building. You and Lily, you are what home feels like." He took a deep breath. "So please, move in, come home, with me." The words hung in the air, simple, direct, and more powerful than any poetic declaration. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation, an offering of everything he was and everything he had. It was the ultimate act of trust, of vulnerability. He was opening the door to his empty, grieving house and asking her to fill it with her light, with Lily's laughter, with life itself. Tears streamed down Alara's face, but for the first time in her life, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She didn't need to think. The answer was already in her heart. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Julian. We'll come home." Months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, a small crowd gathered for the dedication of the new Amelia Vance Children's Wing at the city's central library. Julian, standing at a podium, looked different. The sadness was still a part of his history, a shadow that gave him depth, but it no longer defined him. He stood taller, and his smile, once so rare, was now warm and easy. He spoke of his late wife's love for books, for the power of stories to shape young minds. Then, his gaze found Alara and Lily in the front row. "This wing is dedicated to the memory of a great love," he said, his voice clear and strong. "But it is also built in celebration of a new beginning. It is a testament to the fact that even after the harshest winter, spring can arrive. That even in the deepest silence, you can find a new song." He stepped away from the podium and walked to where they were sitting. He knelt down in front of Lily, his expensive suit wrinkling on the floor without a second thought. He held out a small velvet box. "I have something for you, Lily," he said softly. Inside was a beautiful silver locket. He opened it to reveal 3 small, empty frames. "This first space is for a picture of you, and this second one is for a picture of your mom." He pointed to the third empty space. "This one is for me, if you'll have me, to keep, forever." Lily's eyes grew wide. She threw her arms around his neck, the locket clutched in her hand. "Forever," she whispered into his ear. Julian hugged her tightly, then stood up, his eyes finding Alara's. He didn't have another box. He didn't need one. His commitment was not in a ring, but in his every action, his every word. "Alara," he said, his voice for her alone, though the world watched, "let's fill that house with so much noise and laughter and crayon drawings that it forgets it was ever empty. Let's build our forever." She didn't need to say yes. Her answer was in the brilliant, joyful smile that lit up her entire being, a smile that mirrored his own. Later that week, they found themselves back where it all began, the coffee shop. It was a rainy Tuesday, just like the first day. But this time, the gray outside couldn't touch the warmth inside. They sat together at a table, not as strangers separated by grief and hardship, but as a family. Julian watched as Lily showed Alara the picture she had chosen for her locket, a drawing of the 3 of them holding hands under a bright yellow sun. He reached across the table, his hand covering Alara's. She looked up at him, her eyes full of a love so deep and steady It felt like the bedrock of the world. On the wall behind the counter, the owner had put up a new chalkboard sign. Julian hadn't noticed it before, but its message seemed written just for them. It read, "Home is not a place, it's the people who stay." Julian looked from the sign to the woman he loved, to the little girl who had saved him with a simple question. The rain fell, but his world was awash in color. He was home,